Well, welcome everybody to our second July WEAll talk. It's really, really nice to have you all in here. I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to go through today, thanks to Christian's time and presentation on ethical world trade as an alternative to this is my English, to free trade and protectionism. I'm Ana Gomez. I'm the network lead for WEAll, and we're celebrating WEAll talks every month. WEAll members are always offering their time and their knowledge and their willingness to create deeper discussions in specific topics, and we're super grateful for that. And just for those who are participating in these talks for the first time, I just want you to know that this is not a webinar. This is a space for us to discuss, we're going to take advantage of having Christian here, but we are going to share knowledge, experiences, questions, and so I hope that we can share lots during this hour that is the length of the WEAll talk. While Christian is going to be talking, I'm going to be paying attention to the chat just in case you want to throw any questions or any comments in there. Everything is going to be saved to be shared at the end with everybody on the WEAll Citizens platform and on Slack. And then once the conversation is open mics for everybody, please raise your hands. I'm going to try to keep track of everybody who wants to add or question or share any thoughts. So again, welcome. Thank you so much, Christian, and over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, WEAll, for offering this space, for sharing some thoughts and ideas. You said that in the beginning I should pose a question to everybody, or, well, then I start right away with that question before everything. Or, yeah, maybe just say two or three sentences why this topic is one of my most passionate topics, besides the economy for the common good. One reason is because I was already engaged for 20 years ago in the I wouldn't call it no global movement, but the movement critical with globalization. For instance, I attended the ministerial conference of the World Trade Organization in Cancun. I guess that was 2005 or something, and I met activists from all over the world within the OWINS network, the Our World Is Not For Sale network, yeah, out of which grew the Seattle to Brussels network, which I'm also part of. And this was one very strong experience that on the one hand, economists talk about free trade, and on the other hand, there are protesters from all over the world against this understanding of free trade, but it's not mentioned most of the time in the media. That was very impressive, and that's just one predecessor of my dedication with this topic, and the other, sometimes people say economy for the common good is a nice idea, but what will we do on the international level? And ethical world trade could be a part of the answer, that an economy for the common good thought on the international level needs a different trade order, doesn't need either free trade or protectionism, needs something else, and this could be a part of the answer. And my question to you is, who should and could shape and configure and decide on this different trade order? And imagine you could organize a process in your village where you live, in your hometown, on the cornerstones of a new international trade order that you desire according to your values, your preferences, and your needs. My question is, how would you organize such a process in your hometown, in your village? I was asked by Anna to start with a question, and this is actually my most burning question to you.
So whoever wants to answer, just open your mic, or if you're having issues, just let me know, raise your hand, and I will make sure that you are unmuted. But feel free to give it some thought. And Miguel, there you go.
Well, sometimes a good answer is a good question.
Oh, Miguel, your connection.
Christian, the concept of the concept of make visible the invisible hand of the market.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I read that from you some years ago. So this is also possible for international market. So the question is information, and today the technology allow everything.
Yes.
So
I think information
so in some way I'm
one part of the answer, of course. Maybe on the macro level, in the meaning of alternatives, give the information that there are alternatives to these extremes, which we discuss exclusively, free trade and protectionism. There are many more alternatives how to shape the global trade regime, and this is information. And then, of course, in order to make the hand of the market or the state invisible or visible, make work properly and better, we have to make it visible, define it, what it is exactly, and then shape it according to the objectives that we pursue. But this has to be a transparent, a conscious, and a democratic process. Actually, that's the core of what I will propose in the next minutes. So I agree with your point.
Stuart, go ahead. Oh, hold on.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Christian. The term you often hear in the context of reforming world trade is level the playing field. But the problem is there isn't so much a playing field, but a vertical unclimbable cliff that many countries face. And so unless one actually tackles the fundamental disparities in income, wealth, etc., it's very difficult to see how you can get a world trade system that starts to have equity in it. But I'd be interested if you pick up on that point, Christian.
Well, can I answer straightforward? Because I think that's one great example of the rhetoric on the whole issue, which is extremely manipulative, because the playing field is level, is even, just on some aspects, like competition under certain circumstances, where the more powerful, the bigger, the more industrialized, and the companies with a higher degree of technology have advantages. But on many other aspects, this playing field is as uneven and as unlevel as it can be, from human rights to taxes, from climate protection to biodiversity, from protecting local communities to cultural diversity. And the manipulation consists in defining or advocating levelness only where you are strong and where others are weak. So actually the metaphor of a level playing field turns out to be a straitjacket in the reality for those who are weak on these aspects. And I guess both terms come from Thomas Friedman, the New York Times journalist. At least he coined the term straitjacket. And I guess he was talking a lot about the level playing field as an objective.
Yeah,
I will add on this a little bit later.
So there are comments from Vicky, Mark, and Yannick on the chat, Christian, and I don't know if you would like to respond to them right now, or maybe you want to go into your presentation and then we can go through that after, whatever you prefer.
From Mark, you said?
From Vicky,
Vicky
on
first,
the chat, yeah. Vicky, Mark, and Yannick.
Yes, well, I agree with Vicky's proposal, but ask back how to operationalize it. What this means, stop this conversation now and first invite representatives from indigenous communities. Maybe if we agree on continuing this conversation, then the next talk on this topic could be inspired by a representative from the indigenous communities. At least I will consider that topic in my presentation because it's also included. Mark? Yes, the education system, and in this case, the economic education system, doesn't really present alternatives or doesn't give us the freedom to choose between alternative trade orders and trade policies. There is actually no alternative. That's also, it's not only the wording of Margaret Thatcher, it's not only the wording of Thomas Friedman. He says the straitjacket, which I will refer to a little later, which is free trade, and there is no alternative. So they use a language which is not only undemocratic, because in democracies there are always alternatives, but also unscientific, because the role of science should be to introduce to the many alternatives that they are. This is this is even positive science, which I don't like too much, but to just tell about the diverse theories that there are. But economic science has chosen not to talk about alternatives in trade theory. There is just one theory, which is free trade, which is already a misnomer in my understanding. I will elaborate on that. But everything else, what is different from this free trade concept is just simply dismissed as protectionism, and this is not science. This is something between a rhetorical manipulation, as we already stated before, and the propagation. That's what's happening, especially in current economic science, and more especially even in trade theory. I will actually start my presentation exactly with that. But you said that also, oh, more and more. I assume I will not do my presentation today.
Well, if you don't mind, for those who he hasn't responded personally, I think I'm going to keep those. I'm going to keep track of the other. And I think it was time, Christian, for you to develop and, talk on, and I'll make sure that people get responded.
Yeah, at least Bob's question will be answered in the slides at least.
Good.
Okay, so thank you for giving me now 15 minutes. We agreed on for introducing the alternative to free trade and protectionism, ethical world trade, and I continue where we just interrupted. That economic science seems to believe in a consensus that free trade is both the best solution for the international trade regime as well as the only theory. I remember even another quote from Paul Samuelson that he said, we don't need a new trade theory, and if we needed one, I would have invented it. That's what he said. I think even in the same interview in 2004, so it's not too long ago. But also other economists agree. There's almost a faith in free trade, which is not questioned in standard economic education. And this makes it easy for politicians to propagate free trade and to anchor free trade laws in international agreements and also in European law and national law. Of course, Germany profits from free trade as the export world champion. But is it that simple that everybody who has a different idea or does something different is automatically and immediately a protectionist? And I'm not only referring to Donald Trump, but this is one picture of Cancun in Mexico. These are protesters from all over the world. Those with the straw hats are rice farmers from South Korea. They protested together with corn farmers from Mexico. And the question is if there are really protectionists. And here I want to start with manipulation in the language. I think that both terms are misleading. They are both misnomers. Free trade disguises something else, which later I will call enforced trade rather than free trade. And protectionism is not at all the most appropriate word for those who just criticize free trade and ask for alternatives. In order to find a definition of what free trade could be, we can look into European law, and actually that article that guides trade law, external trade policy of the European Union. It's Article 206 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. And you see the underlined part of the article. The goal is the progressive abolition of restrictions of international trade and on foreign direct investment, and the lowering of customs and other so-called non-tariff barriers. This is the goal, and this is really amazing because the treatment with the application of a different instrument, no matter of building or debuilding an instrument, turns into a goal, no matter how the impact is on human rights, on labor rights, on social cohesion, on climate stability, on biodiversity, on cultural diversity. Nothing of these goals, in my understanding, is in the article. So just eliminating barriers to trade becomes the goal, the overarching goal of trade policy. And this is the definition of free trade. So you're free of any responsibility how the elimination of trade barriers has effects on everything that is really a value, from human rights to climate stability to just distribution or to gender equality, just to name a few. So opening borders ever wider is a goal in and of itself, or trade. I prefer to call it enforced trade because you're not allowed not to do so. That's the legal consequence. If you're not opening border, maybe more than is good for you, or more than the majority of the population in a certain country is willing to, you can be punished by international law and by international tribunals. I think enforced trade is the better term. If you take any of these free trade agreements and ask, can you sue the violation of human rights or the extinction of a species? The answer will always be no. You cannot sue anybody for these damages. But can you sue a government which is not enforcing trade? Yes, you can. And that's why I re-term it enforced trade, because you can enforce it by international law. Protectionism, on the other hand, and there's just these two, means logically the opposite, like building up trade barriers, closing borders progressively, and considering trade as a bad thing. And why do I give this definition? Because of the term ism. If you turn protection, which is something relaxed and legitimate, into protectionism, I'm a linguist. This means that the protection becomes a goal in and of itself. So the goal is not any longer to protect human rights. No, it's to protect by the sake of protection. And this means that more protection is always better than less protection. And this means that the logical meaning of protectionism is that the ultimate goal is to close borders completely. And that's equally nonsensical as calling free trade the allowance to violate human rights and to heat up the global climate, because trade is more important than these global common goods. Is there an alternative in between these two extremes and these two nonsensical goals? Yes, there is. Stop considering first and foremost the means. Trade is just a means, and we should not consider and talk first about the means and its promotion without any limit, or its abolition without any criteria. But let's first look at the goals. And the goals are existing international law, from human rights to cultural diversity. And then we should use and adjust the means according to the goals. And this can mean that sometimes trade is warmly welcome if it helps us to achieve our goals. But in other cases, when it puts at risk the achievement of our goals, we can restrict it without any problem and without being called protectionists. Because we are not protectionists if we protect human rights, and we are not protectionists if we protect the global climate, and we are not protectionists if we protect indigenous communities who should have a saying on every trade agreement. Well, and back to the rhetoric level, scientists, economists, instead of offering these alternatives, they just say there is black and white, day and night, capitalism, and if you're against capitalism, you're automatically a socialist, and there is nothing in between. I just show this slide as a comparison because in order to legitimize an extreme position, you have to blame every criticism on that extreme position as the opposite extreme. That works with everybody who criticizes capitalism is automatically a socialist and not an economist for the common good, for instance. Everybody who criticizes excessive inequality is automatically for the elimination of inequality, which is not the case. And everybody who criticizes today's understanding of free trade is automatically called a protectionist, which is not the case either. Just this to show you a pattern of rhetoric manipulation, which works brilliantly, because in Austria and Germany, there's no politician who dares to say I'm against free trade, because I consider trade just as a means, but not as an end in and of itself. You won't find a single politician in parliament, in government, who challenges the goal of free trade. They say, well, free trade is not a bad thing, but they already approved the framing of the existing order. They already approved free trade. Okay, so let's use the second half to propose the alternative to both nonsensical extremes. 6 cornerstones of an ethical world trade regime. First, let's go back to the multilateral level. Let's not do bilateral agreements. Let's go back, but not outside the United Nations, but inside. For those of you who don't know, the World Trade Organization is not part of the United Nations organization. In order to not having the need to adjust trade law with human rights, with labor rights, with climate protection, with the protection of cultural diversity and other existing international agreements. The alternative would be to bring the game rules for international trade within the United Nations and of course linking them to the existing law. But then automatically, instead of being a goal in and of itself, trade would be degraded into a means to help achieve and fulfill human rights, climate justice, and so on. And then, of course, it would be logical, consequent, and legitimate that those countries who are more consequent and more ambitious in fulfilling with the existing international law, human rights covenants, labor rights conventions, climate protection agreements, they can protect themselves against those other countries who don't. And this would be a new level playing field, Stuart, instead of making the level playing field for all who just eliminate trade barriers. This would be a level playing field between those who respect and comply with international treaties, and unlevel playing field against those nations who do not comply. Yeah, I let it there because time is short and we have then more time for discussion. Second cornerstone is the precondition for everything. And the precondition for everything is that all countries commit to balanced trade balances in order to avoid imbalances, which in the best case lead to trade wars, which we have currently between the United States and the European Union, China, and other countries. And in the worst case, it leads to political and geopolitical wars in history. And this is why John Maynard Keynes already proposed in 1944 to establish a mechanism which provides that both surplus countries and deficit countries come back to balance with their trade balances. Joseph Stiglitz said, now the moment has come to implement John Maynard Keynes' proposal. And I want to add on that, if we really took seriously David Ricardo, then he would make a perfect match with John Maynard Keynes, because if you really read, instead of just referring to Ricardo, which the World Trade Organization does, but without having understood anything of what he wrote, then we read in the quotation from David Ricardo that he writes about the universal good of the whole. Hey, the universal good of the whole. This means that every participant, every participating country from trade should profit equally. And what is the logical, even the mathematical translation of profiting equally from international trade? Well, having a balanced trade balance, selling the same as you buy from others. And the implementation of that idea was Keynes' proposal. So in my understanding, they make a perfect match. But the World Trade Organization is highlighting Ricardo, misinterpreting him, and is making John Maynard Keynes invisible. No, not a single word on his proposal, which would be the fundament of a more just international trade regime. Third one, no equal treatment of poorer and richer countries. If we look at history, all today rich countries were protectionists, under quotation marks. In their history, there are great books on that. Guess it or not, United States were the most protectionist country until World War II. That's why the economic historian Paul Weyrauch named the United States the mother nation of protectionism. But in his book, and also Ha-Yeon Chang reminded us that they did not invent protectionism. They learned it from their mother colonial country, Great Britain. So I would therefore give the honoring name of grandmother nation of protectionism to Great Britain. And more importantly, give all today countries that are as poor as Great Britain was in the 17th, 18th century, and the United States in the 19th century, give them the same right to protect themselves, which is not protectionism, which is protect the weak, the poor, the young, the non-competitive. And this leads me to my fourth cornerstone. Thomas Friedman, we already referred to him. He proposed to apply a golden straitjacket to poor countries, which means that they cannot choose how open they want to be and how much they want to trade. They had to accept by force open borders, although this made many of them poorer and not richer, which was the promise of Thomas Friedman. But only the violence in his language is so amazing, because how can an international journalist propose to put a straitjacket, which is physical violence, on countries? And as an answer to that violent metaphor, which is widely known in the international political discourse, I propose, no, please, let's give everybody a dancer's dress instead. And the dancer's dress allows every country to make its industrial policy, its environmental policy, its regional policy, its labor market policy, its energy policy. If a country says the indigenous communities have the best idea how to run the economy, then they should have the right to practice these concepts, and they should. Free trade, for me, would actually be the freedom to choose how open or protected a country wants to be. That would be a free trade regime. if you don't have that freedom, I deny to accept it, the term of free trade, and propose instead the term of enforced trade. Priority for local markets. It's not a new idea. World Localization Organization, Helena Norberg-Hodge, but also recently, as a learning from the COVID-19 crisis and also the climate crisis, there are more and more people who propose and advocate localization. And one of the believers, John Maynard Keynes, writes about himself that he was educated to believe in free trade. And if you questioned free trade, it was regarded as something almost immoral. That's what he wrote about his own education. But then he started to thinking critically, and he made up his mind, and he changed his opinion, and he stepped out of the church of free trade believers, and he said, let's keep products homespun wherever possible. Maybe we don't agree literally today, but it's interesting to just remember it. And the last cornerstone is, well, to limit and diminish the power of international corporations. And here we see that the playing field is extremely unlevel because unregulated where needed. The least elements of global governance to accompany a global trade order would be a global fusion control, an international tax authority, which stops tax avoidance, a financial supervision authority, which splits up banks that are too big to fail, a global court for human rights, where people whose human rights are violated by transnational corporations can go directly. This doesn't exist. We are working on an international trade court, but we're not working, or our governments are not working on an international human rights court. Well, a third covenant on ecological human rights. I don't go deeper because it takes time. Maybe we have in the discussion. And an entrance ticket to global markets could be a kind of, in the first corporations, it was a charter. Today we could say only B corporations are allowed to enter the global playing field, or companies with a common good balance sheet. Here's a good opportunity for B Corps and common good companies to collaborate. And only if you have either of these entrance sheets, you are allowed to play. And in the case of the common good balance sheet, which is very similar to the B certification, you can reach a higher or lower score. And the idea is only if you have a green score, you can trade freely. And if you have a yellow, orange, or red score, your access to the global market is more expensive. And if you have a red one, you cannot access global markets at all. So as long as corporations decide to tolerate the violation of human rights, to use tax havens, not disclose their lobby activities and some others, they are not allowed to access global markets. There should be rules and conditions for everything, also world markets. And here is a proposal which leads to my last part. I ask for 2 more minutes and then I'm done. This is a rephrasing of Article 206, which I'm firmly convinced that if people had a choice between this rephrasing, European Union should contribute to the progressive implementation of all human rights, labor rights, environmental and climate protection, more equitable distribution and strong social cohesion, high cultural diversity, in sum to the global common good. And now my favorite final sentence is, trade is a means to help achieve these goals. That would be a text worthy of being included in a constitutional treaty, such as that one of the European Union. And now my point, if people had the choice between this wording and existing wording, I'm firmly convinced that this one would enjoy a clear majority. So my last point is, it's not about missing alternatives, it's about missing democracy. And building on Colin Crouch and his analysis of post-democracy, I tried to answer the question, well, how could a real democracy, as also the Indignados in Spain call it, how could it really look like? And the answer is complex, and I don't go deeper. I just name some sovereign rights that we, the citizens, should get. Sovereign by chance means to stand above all. So if you take the principle of sovereignty literally, the people, the citizens, would be the highest instance in democracy, and this means they could rewrite the constitution, they could dismiss the government, and they could, of course, both mandate an international treaty and also have the last saying on the outcome of negotiations for an international treaty. These are minimum standards for the future democracy, and my answer to my question in the beginning is that we organize local assemblies, similar to Ireland, similar to citizen parliaments, but of course they should be one day formally binding, and they could deal with let's say 10 most relevant cornerstones and vote on alternative solutions. So on every cornerstone they could have 2 to 5 alternatives. And I made a first experiment on Vienna University for Economics and Business, where I was teaching for 10 years. And I thought that if I offer these 3 alternatives, that of course free trade would still be the winner, because it's a very conventional university. And the method of voting that we use in the Economy for the Common Good, and which was developed by 2 mathematicians of University of Graz, it's called systemic consensus, and you have to propose at least 2 alternatives and measure then the resistance against all alternatives. So you don't measure affirmation, which gives a lot of power to Donald Trump, Mr. Bolsonaro and Berlusconi, but they have no chance at all if we measure resistance against the proposals, and if that proposal that provokes the least resistance will be the winner. I don't explain it now more in depth because I want to close. I show you the result of the resistance voting. Protectionism has a higher resistance than free trade. That's what I had expected. But I have never dreamt of the result that ethical trade did not meet any resistance after a conversation of 2 hours with classical, traditional, standard economics students at the Vienna Business and Economics University. That was so astonishing. I would be very optimistic of the outcome of a real life democratic process that allows the people in every village, in every town to decide on the 10 cornerstones of our global trade order. It would for sure neither be free trade nor protectionism. It would be something better. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you so much for everything that you have shared. I hope that you can see everybody clapping, and you can't hear, but I hope you can see it. I just want to, so while you were sharing all this, I want to bring a few comments for you because you haven't had the opportunity to read it. But Vicky shared food security requires both some level of redundancy as well as protection in order for local production to thrive. Michael Hallam, double think as a fine art, some interesting parallels with the economic growth debate. And Bob has a couple of questions. Is there a way to reconfigure trade as a means of, maybe Bob, do you want to, I mean, I don't want to do all the talking. Actually, now is for everybody to express themselves and share and be asking Christian, direct questions. So Bob, I'm going to start with you if you're okay with that.
I was just building on the idea of trade as a means and piggybacking on the definition of what that means might be. it might be a means to attain the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And since all countries on the planet have signed up for those things, maybe if we articulate what those means might look like, a means to what, using SDG language, it would help build the wave of interest and demand for a trade system that has the attributes that you just described.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree, and I think it's a great example to show the difference between soft international law and hard international law. Hard international law is not binding international law, because human rights law, labor law, the climate agreement, these are all bindings, but they are still soft because they're not enforceable. Trade law is enforceable. There are international tribunals, and you can sue both countries. Countries can be sued both by other countries, and if we look at the investor-to-state dispute settlement mechanisms, they can also be challenged by corporations. And this is enforceable international law, and that's why it's hard international law. The SDGs are not enforceable, so they are soft. And they actually just repeat what human rights covenants, labor conventions, climate agreement, it already exists, but it's not enforceable. And that's where we feel so powerless and so impotent, and we have to kind of repeat that we actually want to achieve these goals. But again, different from trade law, we do not commit to be sued if we do not comply with them. No government can be sued if it doesn't comply with the SDGs, but every government which signs a free trade treaty can be sued and can be punished severely and hardly if it does not comply with free trade agreement, and can be sued not only by other governments, but progressively by corporations directly. You all have heard about these direct investor-to-state lawsuits, which are already more than 1,000 since they began in the late 1980s or early 1990s. And I think this is also the problem with the SDGs. I totally agree. They kind of already exist, but they are not enforceable in international law. Now they are again not enforceable, but that actually would be the whole exercise to turn the goals into the enforceable elements of international law, and to degrade the means into non-enforceables, because they're just means.
Actually, I'll stop, but I just, I was looking for a way to make them enforceable through the WTO. So if there is a mechanism that has some teeth in it, which are the World Trade Tribunals and so on, let's make it a precondition that the people who are doing this trade honor the fact that whatever they're doing should not interfere with the attainment of the SDGs. It was a long shot. I'm just looking, I agree that there's no teeth in the SDGs, but if the mechanisms that do have teeth can be used as a way to firm up those commitments, it would be kind of nice. That's all.
Theoretically, yes, the anti-dumping rules within the World Trade Organization could theoretically be extended to all these so-called non-trade concerns, from human rights to climate protection to just distribution. So theoretically, there is an entrance door in international trade law. I just would end with the question, is the World Trade Organization the best place to reform international trade rules, or should we rebuild them from scratch within the United Nations? That's my final question on that.
Thank you. So there are different comments. I hope everybody's paying attention to the chat. I'm trying to keep track of all the different questions. So I think questions, I'm keeping Claudia's one for the end, so everybody will remember about your book. But Yannick, will you please, I know that you have written on the chat, but I'd rather you speaking to everybody. And if I'm missing, please let me know on the chat if I'm missing anybody. I'm just gonna try to keep track. Where are you, Danny? There you
You're
go.
so good at putting me on the spot, and I was just writing it so I can like not concentrate and focus. Hi, Christian. Thank you so much for this. I'll put my hat on here. I'm a member of the Canadian Environmental Domestic Advisory Group, the CDAG, under the Canada-EU Trade Agreement mechanism. And it's been great because, of course, we're also, as an environmental advisory group appointed by the minister, we're there to give advice on things that could improve, things that need to be called out on sustainability. So I'm just wondering, there's a reality check that things like this are in motion, they're in process, a lot of political will and capital has been expended. So you have an agreement. So without thinking about stopping it, rebooting it, all that, what could be some of those nudges inside an existing agreement that could help nudge those agreements more towards ethical trade going forward?
Well, I understand. I think my image is frozen, but you can still understand me, can't you? Yes. I think it's a very similar question to the previous one. Can we improve the existing trade law in order to give a higher priority to the issues that really matter, the so-called non-trade concerns? Well, you could start to include environmental clauses and social clauses. You could improve in the multilateral trade law the special and differential treatment of poorer countries, which always has been there, but always has been poor and weak and was never sufficient and did never get priority and did never have the same binding force as the main principles of the WTO law had. You could theoretically even expand the tribunal's mandate, that not only, for instance, now there is a new tribunal even on the top of the agenda of the European Union, the Multilateral Investment Court, MIC, and that is meant to multilateralize those existing courts that can be called in conflict cases in bilateral agreements, like, for instance, the ICSID at the World Bank, or the UNCITRAL, or others. And of course, you could expand the mandate of the Multilateral Investment Court that not only investors, means transnational corporations, can sue nation states if they hinder them in their economic freedom and the unfolding of the economic freedom, but also in the other direction, that persons, human beings, whose rights are violated, no matter if labor rights, consumers' rights, health, ecosystems are violated or damaged by these corporations, that these natural persons, that these humans can sue the corporations. That would be something that is, to my understanding, absolutely logical and symmetric, but was never considered by the government so far. So good luck in convincing governments to improve trade law. As I have the consequence of having watching the genesis, the evolution of trade law over more than 20 years, my final conclusion is that governments will not fix it over the next 20 years, although there might be goodwill on some side and some persons and some exceptions of the wrong rule. I would really rebuild both financial markets and the trade order from scratch, with the priorities and participation of the citizens, because they actually, if I can share a last something which gives me, no, I don't find it now. Well, I don't find it. I don't share it, but I did a first exercise with random citizens. I gave them the power to reshape the international trade order, and they virtually implemented the 6 cornerstones from on their own initiative, because it's it's by far closer to common sense, these 6 cornerstones, than to what economists, and that's the problem, because economists are still influencing policymakers in a totally different direction and on the base of totally different values than common sense is based upon. And that's why my conclusion after 20 years is that we should tackle it from the approach of a new democratic system, rather than trying to convince our governments that they should do a better trade policy.
Thank you, Christian. So yeah, we have a long list of questions. Chris Everett, I just want to make sure that you got some answers to your question, the one that you throw on the chat, and I can continue with the next one, or do you rather? Chris, you have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay, yeah, please continue to the next one. I think I have part of the answer from what's been.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you, Chris. Pedro, it's going to be your turn.
Thank you very much. Christian, brilliant. I'm very, very inspired by what you shared. I was just wondering, you know, I'm from Sitamabe, so we're movement builders. And the logic behind this is that we promote the creation of sectors, business sectors, investor sectors, and so on, to actually do the job as well, as if they were basically, you know, plain citizens. So I was just wondering if the idea of creating the opportunity for international business that actually is driven by a new DNA, an impact-driven DNA, could not get together and collectively be part of the kind of system change that you're proposing. That's an idea. It's not only an idea. We're actually starting to connect gradually in Latin America with those who are basically driven by the SDGs, I would say, but that they want to continue to do trade with the triple impact value creation logic, and also help each other to install the, I would say, the impact globalization phase as a logic.
Yeah, thanks, Pedro. Part of, yes, but only if they also demand the reform of the other part, which is the systemic level. Slower. Of course, B corporations and common goods, balance sheet, audited companies, and social businesses, if you take Muhammad Yunus, or if you take fair trade, the fair trade sector, they are a necessary part of the systemic change. But if they do not demand, in the best case together, that the systemic level, which is the legal level, has to turn these alternatives from fair trade to B corporations into the default mode, and everybody else who is not social, who is not responsible, who is not sustainable, has a harder life, then I'm almost convinced that we will not do it. Because one thing is individual voluntarism and being modelic, and it's absolutely necessary and indispensable, but it's never sufficient if the game rules don't support and give and discriminate positively those who stick to the democratic values, to the common goods, to the well, to that what really matters. And at the moment, the game rules are undermining social businesses and B Corps and common good companies, because you know my most favorite graphic is this one. The more responsibility you take, the higher the costs you are, because you do not externalize these costs, you keep them internalized. And the higher is your competitive disadvantage in relation to the cost externalizers. They have lower costs, lower prices, and a competitive advantage. And this is the perverted incentive structure of capitalistic markets. And this is the level playing field. The level playing field is that both enjoy the same rules, but as they take more responsibility, the price level is not level, the price level is not even, but it's very steep, and it gives a competitive advantage to those who violate fundamental values. And that's why I think we should make on the collective level, on the level of game rules, which is the legal framework, we should demand free trade only for those who do good, do more for the greater good, to the universal good, quoting Ricardo, this is already strategic, and make market access harder, more expensive, or even impossible for those who behave differently. And that's why the B certification and the common good balance sheet are so, or the definition of a social business are so important, but they have to become legal. And only if they're legal, policymakers can build trade policy on them. And actually that's in my analysis, the condition for system change, that we do not only live alternatives and our models, role models for the future, but we also pose our joint demands on the rules, on the legal rules of the system.
Okay, so thank you, Christian. So I just want to raise one thing. It's only 2 minutes to 6 o'clock. I'm going to give some extra 5 minutes to this talk. I know that, I like taking time seriously for everybody, but if you are interested in what we're talking, there are two different comments and questions, but I like to give a space to Stephen Cleese, who was the next one. How do you have ethical trade within the confines of the inherent inequalities of capitalism? And there's Stuart, you have a very good question as well. And I have Laura, who is asking for practical opportunities to advocate for these changes. So there are many different things I'm aware of. This is going to take us so long. So Christian, I'm really sorry for saying this, but I need you to choose one. Make sure that we're going to try to keep in time. And I just want to let everybody know that the recording is going to be shared on Slack on the WEAll Citizens platform, that we can continue the conversation, or you can share with me questions that maybe I can share with Christian. It's just, I want to be fair with time, the time use that we're giving. So Christian, what would you like from this questions that I asked about how do we have ethical trade within the confines of the inherent inequalities of capitalism? Stuart is asking, should new global governance arrangements also include global competition controls?
Maybe that
Laura
one.
is asking about opportunities to advocate for these changes and how.
It's really a difficult choice.
I know.
I take Stuart's question because it's kind of, it has several strings. And should it include competition law? There are several answers. One answer I already gave in my presentation. I consider the fusion control as a part of competition law. Actually, I would add even a maximum size for corporations. I proposed a maximum balance sheet for banks of between 10 and 50 billion dollars or euros before the definition of a systemically important financial institution was made by the G20, and I would pose a maximum limit for corporations at between 10 and maybe 10 and let's say 30 billion dollars or euros as a turnover. This would be already a second competition law rule. A third one would be that market share should be by far lower, the maximum, that at least in every branch, at least 10 players have to be. And then we have to reconsider competition in two meanings. First, I would give a competitive advantage those who take care for the common good, and a competitive disadvantage those who don't, which could be even included into competition law. And then this would now be already the the proposal for a further conversation. The literal meaning of competition in Latin, it comes from cum and petere, and means to search together. Whereas what we understand today by competition is to search against each other a single company's maximum profit, which is in correct English, it would actually have to be called counterpetition. In incorrect Latin, it would have to be called contrapetere. So the last part of the answer is to convert the perverted counterpetition into a true competition, and this would mean to reward those companies who collaborate not only sporadically but systematically with other companies. And this means that they share not only their excessive liquidity, but they also share the means of production. They use open source and they collaborate on a systemic basis. And of course, then you would have to reward those who do it to a higher degree against those who do it on a lower degree in order to compensate the competitive, the countercompetitive disadvantage that they would suffer today, and turn it in the already before mentioned fashion into a competitive advantage. Sorry for that many words. You see, I'm not an economist. I'm a linguist, and I apologize for that, or I don't know.
No, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, so what can I say? I mean, Christian, thank you so much for this fantastic talk. Thank you, everybody, for your fantastic questions and comments. I'm sharing everything. I'm going to be sharing everything with everybody. I will be talking to Christian just in case we have a part 2 of this talk. We'll see what happens. But I think it's a very interesting topic, and everybody, I can see your willingness in participating and creating a deeper conversation on this. So again, thank you so much. If you're not part of the WEAll Citizens platform, please join there, because you're going to find a lot of fantastic information, and you're going to continue this conversation on ethical trade.
Anna, what about Claudia's question about the book, just very quickly?
Oh my God, yes, the book. Claudia, you have a question about the book. So she was asking if it's going to be published in English and when, right? Am I remember that right? There you go.
Yes, but
thank you, Stuart.
It is published in English, so
okay.
I hear it. You see it on the left side. It's called Trading for Good, and it's published, I think, in November or something. So it's in English, Spanish, and German for those who are interested. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for this.
Wonderful to know.
Yes.
Is that published this November or last November?
Michael, say that again.
Is that published this November to come or last November?
Last November of 2019. Yes. It already exists. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Well, thank you, Christian. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy a wonderful day, evening, night, whatever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope I'll see you in August 13. We're going to have a beautiful 3 women who are going to be talking about community wealth building and a project that is in Scotland. So I hope to see you all in August, and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
Gracias, Christian.
Thank you.
Abrazos.